Good morning. Thank you all for attending this panel, which is called Leveling the Playing Field for Underrepresented Segments of the Population. My name is Dr. G.L.A. Harris. I'm the track chair, and I'm also Senior Associate Dean and a professor at the Thunderbird School of Global Management at Arizona State University. So thank you so much, as well as our attending audience for coming to this panel and supporting us. We have two panelists. We have Dr. Lorena Murga, who is an associate professor at the University of Texas at El Paso. Ordinarily, we would have asked each panelist introduce themselves, but in the interest of time, we won't. We also have a PhD candidate, Miss Lisbeth de la Cruz Santana, whose surname I kept cutting off the Santana, but she never corrected me. She's at the University of California, Davis. Dr. Murga, your presentation is entitled Disrupting the Military Service to Deportation Pipeline Through Storytelling. And Ms. Santana's is The Public Administration of Military Deportation. You will have 15 minutes each.
Okay. All right. And I don't, yeah. And can we put up the PowerPoint? I don't have that.
Can you share your screen?
Yes. You see that?
Mm-hmm.
Are you able to share it?
Liz, do you have the PowerPoint or does
Yes,
Dr.
I have it.
Harris, do you? Okay, wasn't sure, sorry.
I'm trying to share, but it's not. Oh,
It's not letting me.
okay. Let me do stop sharing. Share. Okay. Are you able to? Okay, good.
Yes.
Good.
Yeah.
All right. So let me do
Right.
15 minutes. All right. All right. You may begin.
Okay. Yes. And so thank you so much, Dr. Harris and everyone for being here today. I also don't want to omit the important work of our colleague, Jennifer Martinez, who's in public policy at Portland State University. She unfortunately couldn't be here today. So I'll present some of the work that Liz and Jenny have been doing. And I also wanted to mention, as I'm faculty at UTEP, but I'm also a part of a nonprofit grassroots organization called Repatriate Our Patriots. And that organization has been working in order to address the issues of veterans living in exile and to also help those that are in the process of deportation. So this is where the work comes from. And I don't know if I can you go to the next slide? I'm sorry. Okay, so so I'm a sociologist, and so it's great to be a part of this public admin conference, public policy conference, because I think that it's important to think through and begin the conversation by thinking about migrants and the ways in which they're included as part of the US. Right? Remembering that not immigrants to the United States are treated in the same way, right? That they're not included in the same way into our you know, the fabric of America, that they have different migration histories, and that compared, for instance, to their white European counterparts, immigrants from Latin America, Africa, and Asian nations experience America quite differently. All right, so often what I will refer to as immigrants of color learn to assimilate to US culture, right? They have to learn to assimilate to US culture. And in that way, they are taught to quote unquote become good citizens, right? In order to be accepted into the nation. And this is where I veer off into addressing the issues at hand today, the detention and subsequent deportation of US veterans. Veterans have the detention and deportation of US veterans has been facilitated by the seemingly depoliticized public administration processes of immigration by local and state governments, right? So this is what we refer to in terms of immigration federalism, right? Defined as the role of the states and localities in making and implementing immigration law and policy. So what's been happening is that there has been a shift in responsibility of surveillance and policing of quote unquote good moral character, right? Thinking in terms of the good citizen, from federal immigration police, or what today is known as ICE, to the local, to state, county, and city levels, right? So enforcement of the nation's immigration laws was once firmly under federal control, with local law enforcement playing an occasional supportive role upon request, and this has changed. And we can see this in this particular chart. It's illustrated in terms of at arrival, childhood arrivals, who most of our, the people that we speak with that are US veterans in exile are here at the childhood arrival situation, right? They were maybe brought to the United States by their parents. At one point, maybe they found out, I'm not a US citizen, and here they are, right? But when they arrive, I think it's important to think in terms of they're arriving at grade school or high school. They're taught what are often American cultural traits, right? The English language, cultural practices. I mean, thinking like, for instance, sports, right? Football, symbols of American culture, the Pledge of Allegiance, right? And here in Texas, at least in our public school in my hometown of Uvalde, we also honored the Texas flag, right? So we're very much taught to be ingrained in these American values and culture. And there's a relationship, right, of those processes of Americanization and assimilation, because oftentimes the assimilation process, it means that we end up losing our mother tongues, right? Our languages. We lose our customs, some of our traditional practices, and we are taught to, you know, in all ways just be American. But there's also then the enforcement of citizenship and how immigrants are policed throughout their lives, right? So you're taught to be that you are a part of this nation, yet you end up being there's surveillance, there's an enforcement of policies that end up impacting the ways in which these immigrants live. And at different times throughout US history, we can see how immigrants have been under surveillance and excluded from being a part of the US. We can think as far back as the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which prohibited the migration of Chinese laborers in the US. You know, this is a racialized immigration policing policy. In the chart, I'll highlight a couple of things just for time. For instance, the examples of how immigration federalism works can be seen in Proposition 187. In 1994, and this I remember very clearly, the Save Our State, right, where Pete Wilson, governor at the time, was concerned with quote unquote illegal immigration, right? So in 1994, there was a ballot initiative to establish a state-run citizenship screening system and prohibit undocumented immigrants from using non-emergency healthcare, public education, and other services in the state of California. And then I'll jump to one of the acts that has been kind of pivotal to the ways in which you know, some of the immigrant military folks that we come in contact with have been impacted by, and that's the 1996 Clinton, the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act. This is a very punitive act, right? It still has dire consequences for the ways in which our veterans that are non-citizens are living, and of course other immigrant populations. The provisions enacted within this such as the expansion of aggravated felonies, creation of the 287G program, the reduction in due process rights, right? All in, intensified funding of border militarization. I, living on the US-Mexico border all these years, have very much seen the ways in which this has impacted our communities. With this act, all non-citizens, regardless of legal status and including long-term legal permanent residents, became subject to removal and greatly expanded the offenses that could lead to formal deportation, right? So it authorized DHS to also, for instance, with 287G, the program under this act, that authorized the Department of Homeland Security to deputize selected state and local law enforcement officers in order to enforce federal immigration law. Secure communities enabled the US government to, the DHS and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, once, for instance, the sheriff's office had someone in custody, they use biometrics, right? Fingerprints, and that would be able to connect them to the larger database of the FBI and see if someone was an undocumented person, right? And so that very much changed the ways in which policing worked in our communities. State examples that when using the term, for instance, crime migration and policing, we can see that very clearly in states like Arizona with SB 1070 in 2010, which allowed for the racial profiling of anybody that looked foreign, which was basically Mexican-American population, Latino, Latina, Latinx, in the state. And today, while living in Texas, we're experiencing Abbott's Operation Lone Star. And that has been something that is under a disaster declaration. It's now in it covers 53 counties, most of them on or near the border. And it has given Abbott the authority to deploy the Texas National Guard to the border. The state agencies responsible for running Operation Lone Star are the Texas Department of Public Safety and the Texas Military Department. So all of these policies together, right? This is the context in which people are living, right? This is the context in which our military folks that are non-citizens are experiencing, law enforcement and their enforcement of citizenship, right? There have been instances in the past where there have been service-based naturalization and instances where naturalization process has been expedited. For example, Bush signed Executive Order 1326-9, and this was right after 9/11. And it was done in order to expedite naturalization for aliens and non-citizen nationals serving in an active duty status in the armed forces of the United States during the period of war against terrorists of global reach, unquote, right, quote unquote. And so it was done for particular reasons. These small changes or these small what you might see as band-aids to the system, right, are actually very small. There are great failures. There remain failures in the ways in which our non-citizen military folks are experiencing their situations. There are no automatic naturalization when entering the armed forces. Right now, you have people that end up falling through the cracks in a lot of ways. Some military veterans, some veterans that were in the military, right, that have been exiled, often thought that their paperwork had been processed and that they were citizens, right? So paperwork is often lost, or details aren't clearly stated, or they thought that maybe there was automatic citizenship upon entering the armed services. And so all of these things end up really impacting the ways in which our veteran military, or our veterans that are living in exile end up being victims, I think, or at least a part of the failure of our US policies, right? That while living in the United States, they are often, again, go under surveillance. They can be stopped at any point in time. If they have a DUI, right, that can lead them to jail, and all of those things, right, become part of the larger issue to discuss in terms of how we end up, dealing with a system that's broken, right, in terms of immigration. It is this group of people are just one small chunk of the larger broken system, right, that has failed them. And so I want to pass it off to, I know I went very quickly, but I want to pass it off to Liz, because I think that the storytelling process of these, how these policies actually end up impacting veterans is very important. So I'll pass it off to my colleague, and thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lorena. So thank you, Lorena. I'm a PhD candidate at UC Davis, and I go by Lisbela Cruz Santana, or Liz for shorter. And for today's presentation, I will be focusing on legal permanent residents who are service members. And I think it's specifically important to note that they are LPRs, or green card holders, because that in itself already begins what we like to call the pipeline to deportation. So let's begin. So this pipeline, as outlined here, is part of my doctoral research at UC Davis, which focuses on the deportation of US veterans and, as a whole, US childhood arrivals. And as my colleague mentioned, childhood arrivals are those who migrated to the US as children. Many came in undocumented, others, like the veterans we will be looking at today, with a permanent with the status of permanent resident, or others with a student visa and maybe overstayed and basically lived undocumented as a result. But to focus specifically on the stories that will continue this presentation, the concept of being a legal permanent resident and also being a childhood arrival allows us to see the dynamics of mass expulsion of a community, and specifically veterans that grew up in the US, were shaped also to serve in the military, really furthering their identity to feel Americanized and to be American, and also what that expulsion and forced migration out of the US really means for this specific group and generation of child arrivals. So as you can see in this pipeline, the pipeline starts with being LPRs, then enlisting in the military. And one of the main reasons, as many of our storytellers communicate, enlisting was one of the reasons, getting their citizenship was one of the motives for enlisting in the military. So I'll start with that. And this military pipeline is going to illustrate the different stages that really highlight the push-out factors that lead to the deportation of former veterans who are also immigrants, which I think is a combination that sets them to really be funneled into a pipeline that hardly any of them are seeing a pathway of permanent return to the place that they served and that they call home. So we'll begin. Currently, there's many stories in an archive called Humanizing Deportation, for which I am also a researcher since 2016. And through this project, I've been able to learn about the stories of deported veterans. And many of them are the ones whose insight and theories about their own deportation that are informing this concept of the military to deportation pipeline. And for reasons of time, I will only be focusing on Alex Murillo and shortly mentioning Jason Madrid. But as you can see here, there is a wide sample of stories that are really letting us know what it means to serve in the military as an LPR, but also what does it mean when you are being forced out of the country that you served and took an oath to protect. So moving on from that, I will be focusing on Alex Murillo's story. He is a US Navy veteran and was enlisted in 96 to 1999. And he is from Phoenix, Arizona, and was deported to Nogales, Mexico in 2011. So Alex Murillo's stories can be scanned here through these QR codes that will link you back to the Humanizing Deportation archive in case you want to hear his story through his own voice and words, which I think is very valuable in having that testimony of the person and not necessarily just statistics or numbers, which is what we normally hear in regard to deportation. Although we don't have, I would say, official numbers of how many veterans the U.S. supports, hearing their stories really advocates for this community and for us as a public who may not know that we deport veterans, for us to understand why this is even possible, even currently, as we're here sharing space today. So just to begin, Alex is a childhood arrival. He arrived at 1 year old to the US, meaning that he lived his whole life in the US. He accustomed to American ideals, and as he mentions, he has memories of being an American kid and not someone who has any type of roots to Mexico. So that's really important in considering the effects and long-term battles that they may face once deported to Mexico. So he lets us know at the beginning what happens, what leads to his deportation. Initially, this really complicates our idea of like, well, if you served in the military, how is it that someone who really, portrayed this idea of supporting the US and also engaging in the military, how can someone with his profile face deportation? So he mentions that in 2008, he got in trouble for marijuana possession, and he was sentenced to 37 months in federal prison, and that the judge recommended a drug program and halfway house for him. But the fact that he was a legal permanent resident made an immigration flag pop up, meaning that he was now in immigration's radar. Meaning that now he wasn't only just going to serve his time in prison, and as he mentions further in his story, do my time in the US, but now he also had to face one of the most barbaric, I would say, punishments that he has faced to date, which is deportation. So he did his time in prison, and then he was sent off to an immigration prison as well. So our detention centers, and meaning after that, he was pushed out of the US. So he says in his transition out of being out of prison and then out of the detention center that he was put into one of ICE immigration buses that really basically bus immigrants out of the US at any time. There has been a large, I would say, coverage around this issue as well about the times that how many veterans are deported, but not really knowing that we are deporting them, or if authorities in the US do know that we are doing this, there's no discretion in preventing this, which is one of the arguments echoed by all of the veterans. So Alex, in this specific part of his story, mentions that on his way out of prison and he's sitting in this bus, he would hope that someone would stop the bus and say, we're not going to deport this guy because he's a US veteran. So during this transition, so he had already been out of prison, out of detention center, and he's at this pivotal point of, okay, maybe they're gonna figure out they made a mistake and they're gonna allow me to stay. And even if they leave me on the side of the road, I'm okay with that. I just don't want to face deportation. But as he will let us tell us, is he was wrong. No one stopped the bus, and he was basically in the mix with everyone else. So no one cared that he was a veteran and that he served in the military. The one thing that did matter was that he had a marijuana possession felony, and that was enough to put him in this pipeline to deportation. So he does mention now living in Mexico. He was in Nogales, one of the first cities that he was deported to. And he said that he was only able to live there for 6 months because he became aware immediately of the dangers of having veterans living in a place like Mexico, specifically at the border where there's high criminal organization activity. So he does mention this specific moment where there were people from the cartels in Mexico asking for him and trying to find people like Alex who probably could know how to shoot people, specifically based on his military experience. So unfortunately, Alex is not the only one who has faced this type of approach, which is also a very terrific approach that it doesn't only affect the veteran themselves, but also their family members. So it puts them at a very vulnerable and violent situation. So what does Alex do? He decides to leave Nogales and moves to Rosarito, which he identifies to be more accepting of Americans. But still, he's still in Mexico and trying to make life, a new life there, noting the different circumstances and vulnerabilities he is also able to experience. So one of the main arguments in Alex's story is this contradicting identity that he is currently facing in regards to loyalty. So in the military, even growing up in school, even if you don't enlist in the military yourself, just having the Pledge of Allegiance in our schools, honoring 4th of July and different American symbolisms that we grow up with in our day-to-day. He also questions this idea of, I was willing to fight and die for the US, but for some reason, I'm not good enough to live there. So he questions the why. Why is it that I was good to be in the US and fight, and America advocates for its soldiers and we demonstrate being proud of them, but at the end, if you are an immigrant, you're able to be deported. And also in a sense, deportable since you begin your process of enlistment. So as you can see here, we find ourselves in this part of the pipeline, which I think is really important to understand that, yes, today we continue to deport veterans, but what are the ways for them to return home? Are there any pathways for them to basically remedy what the US has done? So Alex does provide us a solution of how veterans can return home. And here I have a photo of Alex and his kids. Luckily for him, his kids are US-born American children and are able to come back and forth between the US and Mexico, which is a whole set of a complicated situation as well, in where we as a nation are making US-born citizens also face this punishment of being away from their family, of having a parent on one side of the border and then another in a different space. So they are also facing their own set of traumas and violence. But focusing here on the soldier and Alex here specifically, he does say that the only way for veterans to go home is once they die. So once they die, they're able to come back to the US and have a funeral with honors. And as he mentions here, and I'll read briefly, he says, they ship our ashes back home and they bury us with honors, and they give us our family a flag that's folded up, and they give us our citizenship. That's what happens when we die. So we know we're going home one way or another, but I mean, really the goal is to get back home while we're still alive, which I feel this sentence in itself is really pushing for what are we doing even after a veteran dies? We still claim their bodies and we still, in a way, say we're honoring them, but we're just showing that we can deport them and still claim them as a person or as a part of our imperialism after they die. And that's the only way they can return home to this day. An important argument made by Jason Madrid here is that the predatory enlistment process by recruiters is one of the reasons why he joined the military. And he's not the only one. But here he says that I thought I was going to become a citizen because that was the promise. And he also goes back to say that he thought permanent resident meant permanent and not deportable. So the idea or the concepts immigrants have of their status don't align with immigration law or crim-migration, which to date is the one thing propelling this deportation machine. So as you can see here, Jason Madrid is advocating for a clarification for what does it really mean to be a permanent resident, especially being a veteran. And just to close off for this section, Alex was able to return to the US maybe like a month and a half ago now, but it's really important to understand that he was only able to return on a humanitarian visa. meaning still today, he is not given his citizenship, which he has earned by serving the military, by also facing this other war that we want to call it as that of being deported. And it's really important for us to continue advocating for deported veterans, because what happens when this humanitarian support is gone? What happens when they have to now be forced again to return to Mexico, which now they have some type of roots there, but it doesn't mean that they belong there necessarily. And it's also important to note that once veterans do return and receive their citizenship, what are we doing as a country to help them assimilate? Because one of the reasons that has really pushed for this pipeline to function is the fact that we haven't really set in place structural places for them to get the help that they need when they come back from war and need support with PTSD, and then they decide to self-medicate or abuse alcohol. And so just thinking about these problems, right, coming from the moment that they're enlisted into their entire time in the military, and when they're told, go back to your communities and do life, it's really hard for them to assimilate. And even for immigrant veterans, it's even harder because they don't get a second chance at all.
2 minutes.
So just to close, I do want to say that noting the stories from the Humanizing Deportation Archive led to the Leave No One Behind mural project. And as you can see here, we have Alex Murillo and many of the other storytellers in the archive. And it's a very inclusive project that not only advocates for deported veterans, but deported mothers, DACA recipients or dreamers, and just immigrants who grew up in the US. And just with this motto of leave no one behind, we want to make sure that the communities in the US and abroad understand what deportation is, to become a little bit more aware of what we can do, for example, in Mexico, to accommodate for their return and facilitate assimilation as best as possible, but also what can the US do to prevent deportation and to bring back families before it's too late. So we'll close it with that. And for the Q&A, if there is time, we can talk more about the Leave No One Behind mural project, but I'll leave this slide here. It has the project's website, and then also different places where we are installing murals that really advocate for the return of deported communities. So thank you.
Wow, there is actually time. You've got 48 seconds, but it is
Okay.
now 11:09. So why don't I'll pause here or cancel that. These have been very powerful presentations. I'm particularly taken by the personal story of this individual, Murillo, and just the fact that where it says you've got, the project Leave No One Behind, that the only way home is through death. How abysmal, how tragic is that? Wow, really powerful. I'll just say, as an immigrant myself from Jamaica, I got my citizenship, not necessarily by being in the military, but I was a permanent resident. So I then became a citizen. Now, having said that, I wonder if this individual, Alex Murillo, if he was a Caucasian, but he was, say, from Germany, or maybe even from Ukraine, or even from another place like Russia, would he have been treated in the like manner? I think it's so unfortunate. What I'd like to do at this time, we have a remaining, actually, wow, it's 11:11 and we end at 11:30, and I'd like to throw the questions out to the audience. Thank you, Dr. Murga and Ms. Santana, for two very powerful presentations. And actually, I think even though many of us were aware that these things occur, I'm so glad that like DACA, you're actually bringing these things to light. And particularly, you're using this platform, meaning the conference, as a way to educate individuals. So thank you for that. So are there any questions from the audience? I see something in the chat. Let's see. Oh, there's someone commenting that they're unable to begin recording. Any questions at all from the audience?
May I add, Dr. Harris?
Yes, go ahead, Dr. Murga.
So I think that and Nick Bass, who is one of our board members, he's a veteran, and he has been, fundamental in trying to identify, right, the number of veterans that are deported. So he has actually been traveling to parts of Mexico, to El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and I think Colombia as well, Nick, I don't remember, but right now, trying to meet up with some of his brothers, right, and sisters. There's also in the Leaving a Woman Behind mural project, the story of Laura Mesa, who is a survivor of military sexual trauma and PTSD. And she has been deported to Costa Rica, right? Separated from her family.
Wow.
And so, but I'm sure Nick could join in if you want, Nick, but I think part of the conversation is, that people don't know, and we don't know the numbers. And I think that's what right now the Biden administration, almost a year ago in July, right, said that they wanted to work on bringing veterans back. But I think that one of the things that's important to note is that they want people with good moral character. This idea of Americanization and good moral character so defines the ways in which we end up, in many ways humanizing and dehumanizing groups of people, right? And how we think of them to be, how we perceive that they are eligible to come back, right? And so, there's so many problematic issues that remain with the ways in which the deportation of veterans happens.
It is almost unfortunate. It seems as if that veterans, I understand that Mr. Murillo had then a background. It's still, regrettably, still illegal under federal law, having or in possession of marijuana, as we would call it, where I come from, ganja, whereas in states it's not. But it's almost criminalizing someone because you're an immigrant, right, despite the fact that you are also a veteran. So we have a question from Mr. Paz. Please go ahead and pose your question, Mr. Paz.
Good afternoon, Professor Santana, Dr. Murga. Hope you guys are doing well, wherever you guys are at. I just got a couple of statements that Dr. Murga probably wanted me to go over. Since we're part of the MPETS initiative by the Biden administration, we've been real hands-on on the ground, seeing how the sausage is made. One of the things I would like to highlight is that when these brothers are coming home, like Professor Santana said,
sisters, right? I'm sure there's some sisters there.
There's Laura Mesa, and there's another deported veteran in Juarez, but she doesn't want to be identified for safety reasons. When they come home, there's not a permanent solution as of now. So they're coming home on humanitarian visas. One of the things about that, coming home on a humanitarian visa, is that you're not able to work. So they're coming home for like a year parole, and they're becoming a burden on their family, and that has a heavy weight on their psyche, on their utility. Another thing is that even though these men have fought in the jungles of Vietnam, the mountains of Afghanistan, and the Tigris and the Euphrates, coming home, dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder, going through the trauma of being incarcerated, and then the trauma of being separated from your family. Not only that, going into these austere environments where you have to deal with corruption, not only by the state, but transnational criminal organizations. These men aren't able, and women aren't able, to digest their trauma. And what I'm getting at is that there's no access to the VA healthcare system. When I've gone into these men's home, whether it's in Juarez, Tijuana, Zamora, Michoacan, Guanajuato, or in El Salvador, the conversation of suicide is always brought up. One of the brothers in San Salvador told me, death sounds so much sweeter than what I've been going through right now. But the only reason I haven't killed myself is because of my mother. And I just had another conversation with another brother in Rosarito, saying that he could jump over the fence at any time he wants, but he served honorably and he wants to walk on the bridge back into America with dignity. And he wants to check out too. He wants to kill himself too, but he says that his grandson deserves to have him in his life. One of the things that we're fighting for is for preventative care, because we know that Rome wasn't built in a day. It's going to take time for the immigration machine to turn its wheels. It's bureaucracy. But one of the things that we're fighting for is for the brothers on the border cities, whether it's Tijuana, Matamoros, or Juarez, because this is where the largest contingent of veterans are, is to be able to access the VA healthcare facilities on the US side. From Panchito Lopez, he's one of the leaders in Juarez, elder gentleman, Vietnam era. He's having trouble walking, was exposed to Agent Orange. And the way the crow flies from his house to William Beaumont, which is a VA healthcare facility in El Paso, is less than 15 miles. But because he doesn't have access to the VA healthcare system, you know what I mean? He has, when his health deteriorates, it's going to come to a point where we're going to have to scramble and put in a humanitarian visa, and who knows how much time he'll have then. And I say that knowing that I've worked with another brother named Camacho, who we've had to help save twice. And it was working with like multiple agencies, DHS, the VA, LULAC, and it takes a lot to get these wheels turning. So, yeah.
This is so unfortunate. As a veteran myself, and I have spent my whole life creating, the Veterans Resource Center. That's my baby, I'd like to say. The Veterans Resource Centers across the country, if not the world, was actually based upon my research in Oregon, which I'm very proud of that, particularly as an immigrant, to have contributed to the life of immigrant veterans and actually, veterans. But to hear these stories, I mean, I was also part of it, Portland State University. Interestingly enough, Miss Martinez is currently a student there. I was there for 17 years. Where we actually had the first director of our program, and for some reason his name is Ray Facunda, who's actually involved in the VA right now, has the traveling stories of the veterans. If something like this could be highlighted in that way, traveling from different states in this country and really highlighting these very important, albeit very tragic stories, I think the American public needs to be aware of what's going on. And I know we've got a lot going on, but I think when it comes to veterans, these things need to be highlighted. These stories are just tragic, just absolutely tragic. And as a veteran myself, particularly as an immigrant veteran, particularly, as I said, creating the Veterans Resource Centers, it's just, my heart bleeds. It really does. It's so sad. Even though I'm very glad to moderate this panel, it's also, I have known about this subject, but it's also an awakening of sorts, that we have so much more to do. There is so much more to do. I hope Miss Santana and Dr. Murga, I really hope you publish, use your scholarship as a vehicle to publish these stories. Mr. Paz, use your experiences, your perhaps collaborating with these two individuals as a way to advance your stories. These stories need to be told. And I don't know if you have my contact information. I know Ms. Santana and Dr. Murga, you both. I'm very much now very interested in this, because I share, there's an intersectionality that I share here. And I'm very interested in this because this is something that we don't talk about, but we need to talk about it. We really do. Wow. wow, I'm looking at the chat. Let me see, are there any questions? There are no questions, just comments. But this is just, wow. I just keep saying wow, because this is riveting. It really is. It really is riveting.
Dr. Harris, if I can make just
Sure,
one
go
more
ahead, Mr.
comment.
Paz. Certainly.
Professor Santana touched on this earlier, the structures in place when these men and women are able to come back home, it's not set. So these, if you can just go with me in this little rabbit hole.
Sure.
These men and women, when they're separated from their family, the bond between their family members withers away every day. Every day is an eternity for them. And the roots are ripped out of the ground. So when these men and women are finally able to come home, there's not a strong enough connection to where they could just open the door. And I have witnessed personally when a veteran goes to see his family members, and he isn't getting the reception that he thought in his head, that he dreamt so much when he was in prison, when he was separated from his family. He's not receiving that love that he's craved for so long. And what does that mean? That their chances of staying in that house is slim, because there's not a solid connection there. So these men are essentially, whenever they're getting placed back into these border cities, DHS is essentially creating a skid row wherever these men are at, and the chances of recidivism skyrockets, because they're not able to work and they don't have any housing. So you're driving them to the streets for criminal
make
behavior.
decisions because they have to resort to these other alternative ways, because they have no way except, as you said, regrettably, many of them are literally contemplating suicide as the ultimate way out, which is so unfortunate. I do have a question here. It says, is there any federal court legal recourse under section 1983, or I'm assuming APA means the American Psychological Association? I'm not sure. The person who posed the question, his or her initials are AK. AK, what? Oh, Mr. Kennedy, what do you mean by APA? Mr. Kennedy, are you talking about the American Psychological Association? Mr. Kennedy, by the way, is an attorney. Oh, Administrative Procedure Act. I see. So to Ms. Santana and Dr. Murga, is there any federal court legal recourse under section 1983 or the Administrative Procedure Act? Are you aware?
I'm not aware of what, I mean, we work with lawyers in order to help, usually through pro bono work. And most of the recourse that some of these veterans have found is through humanitarian parole, as Nick and Liz pointed out. There hasn't been much, I think, I don't know, but I'm guessing just because some of them have, felonies on their lists, right? So
compounds the situation.
Compounds the situation, right? But I think that we've always, argued that the system's what's failed these veterans, right? That if their lives, if the situation were different, right? If they were citizens, they wouldn't be deported. And in all ways, they are citizens, right? And by signing off basically their lives to the US, we think that should be, pointed out often. And the other thing is that they've done their sentences, right?
Both
most
in
of these,
prison and in the military.
Right. They once they've gone to prison or spent any time in jail, they've met that sort of prison sentence, and then they've been deported, right? So I think that that's part of the argument to also take into consideration when thinking through this.
Can I say this? Tomorrow, we have a panel, interestingly enough, that it also includes Mr. Alan Kennedy, who's in the audience right now. He's an attorney. It's called Social Compacts for Veterans Groups. Have they been realized? And it will be, the panel is 10:30 a.m. through 11:30 a.m. tomorrow, Pacific Standard Time. So I really encourage everyone, including Mr. Paz, if you don't mind, because your opinions will be definitely valued at this particular. The only problem is time is always the essence, because we really need 2 or 3 hours for this to really thrash it out, and we won't have the time. But I know Mr. Kennedy will be there because he'll be on the panel. So I really encourage you. We have 2 more minutes, and I just want to thank Dr. Murga. I want to thank Ms. Santana and Mr. Paz. I kind of wish you were also on the panel, quite frankly, but you are still able to present your story, which is very much appreciated. Are there any last minute questions? We've got 2 more minutes.
I would just like to say, oh, sorry, Nick. You want to go first? It's fine.
Yeah, real quick. One of the things I would like to highlight is that budgets are moral documents. You could tell the priority of an administration based on how they allocate resources. And as of today, MVETS, Immigrant Veterans Initiative by the Biden administration, has not allocated any resources for representation for these underserved men and women. The only reason that they have representation is because the state of California passed legislation for veterans that have a California connection to receive representation by California attorneys.
Wow,
So,
thank you for saying that. And I think that's such a very good point. The budget is itself a compact. Thank you. Ms. Santana, go ahead.
Yes, and on that same note, right, like the budget. So I feel like we are allocating money or finding support in that sense to deport people, but not really to bring them back. So in the
What a
face
good
of
point.
that,
You're misusing the budget.
right, exactly. Or
excellent
instead
point.
of keeping our families together, we're choosing, right? Because we are making that choice, right, to deport and separate families just based on their immigrant status. And then also you clearly mentioned this on who they are as a person. People of color are the ones who fall prey to our criminal and immigration systems. So with that note, I feel like having the voices of the veterans and everyone else who's a part of these projects, if you can just share them, if you are an instructor or have someone who is a teacher, I think that is a good way to start creating consciousness with your students. And I feel like even with my own students, they feel more equipped to be able to have these conversations. So I did include those links in the chat, but you could also
Thank
look them
you.
up.
Thank you so much. I'm surprised that they haven't booted us out of the room. Normally they put this thing and it says, how many seconds? Please keep talking, because it's 11:30 and they haven't said anything. But I'm telling you, I really appreciate this panel. This information for me has been illuminating. I knew, but I didn't know the extent too. And because you've got so many issues going on in this country today, and obviously you've got so many issues with veterans, but the other dimension of it is undocumented veterans. And then having to, hoping to use the service, going in the service as a medium to citizenship, or at least to permanent residence, only to find that you get deported to a culture, yes, you're connected to, but you're separated from your family. And then, as you said, Mr. Paz, you get this humanitarian reprieve for a year, but you can't work. So you become a burden to your family. Anyway, I see the leave the breakout room. Again, thank you all so much, Dr. Murga, Ms. Santana, Mr. Paz. I know you weren't on the panel, but you were on the panel, and everyone and the attending audience. Thank you all so much. It has been a pleasure. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning at the Social Compact for Veterans. Take care.
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you.
15 minutes, but yes, the in-person aspect is missed.
Okay, well, I'll mute myself now.
Okay, great. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. And thank you for everything you're doing.
Thank you. Can you make me co-host Dr. C, please?
Absolutely. We had a fantastic panel. I can't wait to share the recording with everyone. Give me just a moment. Oh, sorry.
So is there a setting that no one can unmute themselves? Because we ran into that when the session started.
I just clicked a box. Now people will be able to unmute themselves.
Okay, perfect.
Oh my gosh, I
did
can't
it.
believe Blue. It's so good to see you.
It's good seeing you too. How are you?
It has been years. It's
I
wonderful
know.
to see you.
Well, we'll all be together next year.
There's
Yes, I
Blue.
hope so. It's so
I see these
wonderful to
wonderful
see
people
you.
here. Hello, hello, hello.
Hey, Blue.
Hello.
I know these wonderful people.
Yes,
I
and
hear-
thanks
I
a lot
hear-
for
I
everything
heard-
you
I
and
heard Blue.
Agatha and
Hi,
Charlie's
Blue.
been doing.
Oh, there's Clea.
Hi,
Hey,
Claire.
Clea.
Hey, Richard.
Hello,
How you
Ricardo.
Oh
doing?
my God, the whole group is
This is
here.
like a
I love it.
reunion. This is just wonderful. Oh my gosh.
And it makes me remember how much I miss seeing all of you
Yes.
at our various
Yes.
conferences.
Funny, you never said that when last time we saw each other. In
That's
person.
true. Yeah,
But still.
instead of asking you to buy me lunch.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I just now, because I don't know if I get another chance to say thanks you and your leadership team.
Oh,
Wonderful putting this all together.
Blue, when we look at the numbers of the registrants, and Jose has the latest number. Jose, where are we at now? 12 something? Okay, he's probably tweeting something.
Yeah, I'm
I
sure.
think the last number that I saw for registrants was 1286. Can you imagine, Blue?
Yep.
That's
The smallest I can remember is about 75.
Yep. And when we did it at USF in 2016, it was about 150.
Yep.
So it has grown exponentially. And I just finished. I know each of you probably just finished the panel, but we just had the bilingual panel, which
Great.
was fabulous. It was just amazing. Just the translation was great. It was done by a doctoral student here at USF. And Jose had gotten the panel together with different people in it. And Dr. Harris, I would have loved for you to have been in that session, because one of the audience members brought up the fact that she is Afro-Latina, but she, when she shows up in spaces, people see her as a Black woman, and they don't acknowledge the Latina part of her, and then once she starts speaking Spanish, they're like, oh my God, what is this?
Well, here's the thing, as you know, likewise, I may have the Latina part, but
Yeah.
also my surname is Harris.
Yes,
What? You're
Yeah.
not Latina.
that's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's the conversation has to continue. So
So Dr. Johnson, I'll see you in a few minutes in the.
yes, and the other, yep.
Please, in a few
Yep.
minutes. Thank
You
you.
know,
It was
just-
so wonderful seeing all of you. This is like a reunion. This is absolutely wonderful. It really is.
and-
I'm going to
and-
be up.
Look at Michael.
Ricardo?
Oh my gosh, Michael, you're so gray. I didn't recognize you. What's his name?
Where's
Oh
Michael?
my gosh. I didn't recognize.
Ah. Now, Gigi, if you call someone gray, they're going to call you gray.
Now, no. Keep in mind, she calls me gray, and she's not talking about the color of my hair.
Blue, you're still the handsomest guy.
Yes,
At least in this
Yes, he
room.
he just
I'm in,
needs a bow tie and he'll be complete.
That's
I'm
right.
in my, I couldn't do that. to you,
Ricardo, you got to
Ricardo.
get him on the program there with
That's
the bow
right.
tie.
Oh my God. And Michael Masai, don't worry, you still, even with the gray, you're still a good looking man. So don't let Dr. Harris,
No, I didn't recognize him. I literally have to look at the square or the oblong with his name. And I realized, wait, that's Michael Masai.
I saw him down at ASPA.
I haven't seen Michael in 100 years. At
Hey,
least.
hey, Michael, let him know you can still get out on the dance floor and do your thing. You're on mute, Michael. You're still on mute. You're still on mute, Michael.
Yeah, I'll give it a try. I'll be out there.
Being out on the dance floor.
Yeah, can't wait to be in person with you folks.
Yes, it is so good
absolutely.
seeing all of you. It really is. Wow. What a difference 2 years make, huh? Wow.
And again, the latest numbers that we've gotten, registration numbers for this conference, 1286.
Wonderful.
1286.
Outstanding.
And growing.
Okay, so I'll see you all in my NATO panel, right?
Well,
See you in
I'm on a
few
panel
minutes.
next. I'd love to be there. I'm on a panel next, and I'm going up to Napa tomorrow
Okay.
and
Napa-
operate from there. So
Napa in California?
no. It's the
Oh,
Academy.
Napa, the organization. Oh,
Yeah.
We're
We're presenting the second Phil Rutledge Social Equity Award,
that's right.
and of course we've got a tribute to Nadia.
That's right. That's right.
So I live in Fredericksburg, which is about 50 miles south of DC. So I'll be taking Amtrak up tomorrow. So
Oh, okay, cool. Well, the rest of us will see you on Zoom.
yes.
Okay. All right, well, I'm going to use the restroom before the next session. So
That's
I'll
a
see
good
you all-
idea, right?
I think so. That's important,
Take care, folks. Good seeing you guys.
See y'all.
Good seeing all of you guys.
Agatha, just in terms of logistics, will the
Yep.
breakout rooms appear?
So the breakout rooms are now open. So you can click on breakout rooms on the bottom to select a breakout room by clicking the blue join button next to the session you'd like to join. You can always return back to this room at any time to switch sessions. We also left open our help desk and our networking lounge as well.
Hey, Agatha.
That's not working for me.
Congratulations.
Okay, I don't see a button to click on the breakout rooms.
Yeah, same here.
Or it says
So
whiteboard.
if you've already been assigned, Blue, I'll assign you
Okay.
right now. But if you've already been assigned, you have to click the 3 dots. It doesn't let us reassign you.
So click more on your control panel. And then when you see breakout rooms,
Oh, okay. Well, and now,
So this was the same thing. Amanda was able to help me last time, but it's the same situation. I can't get out. Oh, hey, Dr. George.
And who's able to help us in our breakout sessions, because we don't have the ability to share screen, and our volunteers working from a phone. So I don't think she's got the ability to help us. Do you know who can pop in?
we just changed our settings. Which session are you in?
The social inequality.
Social inequality. Amanda, we can check to see which volunteer is assigned for you.
Tiffany,
If not,
but
I'll
she's
go-
working from her phone, she said,
Okay.
so.
What I can do is I can get you access to be able to pin, but I did update the settings, so now everyone should be able to share even in the breakout rooms. without
Since I
any-
came in just now, I get the, oh, cool, thanks so much. I'll head
If you
over.
have any trouble, just let me know and I'll go in and I'll adjust the settings.
Thank you.
Hey,
this is
Wendy.
Blue
Hey,
again.
Hillary.
This is Blue again. I'm now back.
Yeah, Blue, you're innovative pedagogy, correct?
Yeah, but
Okay,
I'm now
Now-
back on the, okay.
you click, yeah.
Hey, I have
I
the same
still-
question though. I don't know what to do.
Yeah,
Which
I'm
session would you like to go to, Bonnie?
Amanda,
I don't know
on
the
team.
number of it. I don't have it in front of me, but I'm
Give me
looking, I
just
thought
a
we were just
second.
getting sent based on where our panel was assigned to. Do we need to do?
Hey, Bonnie, it's Betsy.
Hi,
It's-
Betsy.
It's innovative pedagogy. It's T4P6. I'm going in there right now.
And Agatha, which still says disabled in the social inequality.
Okay,
That
but
area.
this is
The
blue.
blue, you should be able to join. You click.
I'm on T6. I'm T6. The one I've got, you've just invited me to join T4P6.
Okay, hold on. You are P6.
I'm T6P7.
T6. Okay, here we go. T6. You should be good now.
Okay.
Can someone
Thank
put me-
you.
Can someone send me to the military?
Let me try,
panel?
Richard. Let's
I'm moderating
see.
that. Yeah.
Richard.
While they're doing that, I guess I wasn't sure if you're able to hear me, but it wasn't working yet.
Jump in the room with you. You're going to which session?
Social inequality.
Okay, I'll meet you in there now.
Thanks.
So weird, I'm sorry not to be, but where do we put our, do we go to pin and pin ourselves first or?